So let's give them a big hand.
Got a little chair back here. This is great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. This is so much fun for me to be here. We do have family here, which is very exciting. It's just really cool to be here. So, the way I like to do these things is I'll talk a little bit about this book, about what I do, and thank you. And then I'm going to open it up to some questions. So I hope you have some, because what I really want to talk about is what you want to talk about. You know, this is my newest book, but I have written a lot of books. I've written a lot about pretty much every kind of sport there is. So happy to talk about anything, everything, as far as we can go. So let me tell you a little bit first about this book. And so my last two books have been called Why We Love Baseball and Why We Love Football. And for me, it feels like that was a plan. Like I have a lot of people coming up to me going, what's next? Why we love pickleball? Or it wasn't exactly a plan. It wasn't. I had very, very specific sort of personal reasons for writing each of those books. And for baseball, which I've talked a lot about, when I grew up, I'm a first generation American, and my parents, it was very, very important to them that they raised me as an American. Nobody loves America the way my parents do, my father in particular. And so he wanted to raise me as an American, and that was baseball. That meant raising me on the game of baseball. And so when I was thinking about that book, I thought about that a lot, and I thought very specifically about a story about my mother, who does not like baseball or care about it or know anything about it at all. But the very first baseball story I ever wrote, I went to college actually to be an accountant. And I tell the story all the time that when I realized the day that wasn't going to happen, I used to take the city bus to school. And I was taking the city bus home from college one day, and we drove by a business park, and I looked out the window and I saw all of these people there just kind of standing outside and smoking, and they were all dressed in their business suits and had their, satchels, briefcases, and I just remember looking, and it was like an out-of-body experience. I just said, you know what, that's never going to be me. That's just never going to be me. And coincidentally, that was the day I had failed out of accounting. So it worked out perfectly well. The timing was fantastic. And I didn't know what to do with my life. I had no earthly idea, but I had a typewriter at home. And I see some young people here, so I can tell you, a typewriter is like a computer and a printer all in one. So I started writing letters to a bunch of different people and basically saying, I don't know what to do with my life. I don't have any talents. I need help. And one of the people who wrote back to me was a sports editor of the Charlotte paper where we lived, and now live again. And the sports editor said, we send people out to high school games and Little League games and American Legion games, and if you want to do that, we can send you out, we'll pay you $20 and you can see if you like this. And they sent me out to a high school basketball game, and I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. I was scared to death that I did not have the talent to do it, because I wanted to do that so badly. I loved it so much instantly. I instantly thought this is what I want to do with my life. And I was scared because I had never shown I'd never had a single teacher ever tell me that I had any talent for writing, ever. My entire high school, junior high, I never wrote a paper that a teacher said, oh, this is good. The only time it ever happened when I finally broke through was I was in college already by then. And I was taking a class, I had switched out of accounting to English, and I had taken a class where we were reading two different authors. And the topic of the paper that I had to write was to be a fly on the wall, but for a conversation between the two protagonists, the protagonist of this book and the protagonist of this book. And I went home, and I look back now and I realized I had never heard that expression, fly on the wall. So I wrote the paper as if I was an actual fly on the wall. So I'd be like, listen, I don't know what these two guys are talking about, but there's a hot dog there across the room that I have to have. And I handed that paper in somehow. And the professor gave me back the paper, and he had two things on the paper. The first thing he had on the paper was the grade, which was a B. I got a B on the paper. And the second thing he said was a comment, and the comment was, now I teach you in my class, someday I'll teach you to my class. Which, you know, was the first sign I'd ever had that I could do this. So this is very early in my career, and I wrote my very first baseball story, and I was very excited about it. I ran the paper. It was probably 3 paragraphs long. It was just a tiny little story. But my mother called me the next morning, and she said, I read your story in the paper, and it was very good. And I thought, that's the highest praise I could get from my mother. And she said, just one thing, who are you to decide if a run is earned or unearned? And I couldn't argue with that. But that was the thought I had when I was going to write about why we love baseball. It was, to me, like everything about baseball is personal, and it's something to do with family, and it is something to do with childhood, and I wanted to capture that. So then I thought, I'm going to write a football book, and I was trying to think of a similar family type story to think about what it is, why I love football, what it is about football that gets in my soul. And I was born on January 8th, 1967, which was the day of the first Super Bowl. And it was this legend and mythology of my entire childhood that on the day I was born, at the moment I was born, my father was in the waiting room watching football. And I used to hear this all the time, especially from my grandparents who didn't know sports, didn't care about sports. My grandfather, when I would come over to the house, my grandfather would always have this ritual that he would do where he would take the newspaper and he would pull out the sports section very carefully, very just like, as if he was trying to protect it. And he would fold it like he was going to hand me the sports section, and then he would jam it in the trash to tell me how much he despised sports and the fact that I loved it so much. So they would always say to me, like, well, what do you expect? His father was watching football when he was born. I mean, what can you possibly expect from him? When I was 15 years old, I found out that the Super Bowl was not played on January 8th, 1967. It was played on January 15th, 1967, 1 week later. Which means not only was the Super Bowl not played on my day, no game was played on my day. It was the bye week before the Super Bowl. And I was outraged. I just was like, is there anything true in the world anymore? I was so angry. And I went to my parents and I said, You've lied to me. My whole childhood, I've had to hear this story about how Dad was watching a football game, but he wasn't watching. There was no football game. I was born a week before the Super Bowl. And everybody kept saying to me, no, there was a game. He was watching the game. He was watching football when you were born. And I looked it up. In the 1960s, they used to play a consolation game where the third and fourth place teams would play each other for third place. Or, as Vince Lombardi called it, the Losers Bowl for losers. I was born on the Losers Bowl for Losers Day that my father still thought was more important than me being born. So it's in me. It's just, it's inside me. And I thought all the time, I imagine, how many people here, I've done this at a couple of places, how many people here are football fans? As you would expect. How many people here are baseball fans? Pretty much the same people. And I thought about that as I was writing this book, as I was thinking about writing this book. I'm a big baseball fan, I'm a big football fan. But they pull different parts out of me. They're there's a difference between being a baseball fan and what I want out of the game, what I get out of going to a baseball game, than there is when I go to a football game. You know, when you go to a baseball game, like everybody's happy. It's a happy place, you know, and people are there, they're reminiscing and they're telling stories, and you know, the game is, it matters, but it doesn't matter, right? Because you lose, there's still tomorrow. There's always tomorrow in baseball, and it's a happy place. Nobody's happy at a football game ever. At any point during the game, is anybody happy on the field anywhere? Because even if your team just scored and you're like, this is great, we're happy, you're not. Because you know they can score right now. Like the next play, they might return the kick for a touchdown. So it's always this tension and this. When I was working at the Star in Kansas City, every single year for probably 6, 7, 8 years in a row, I would go to Oakland for a baseball game. It just turned out that way. There were just things that happened that for longtime Royals fans here will remember, the Royals went on a 19-game losing streak in one year, 2005, I think, and that ended in Oakland. So I was in Oakland to see if they would finally ever win a game. Then also one year Oakland won 20 games in a row, and the last of their 20 wins in a row was against the Royals. So I went there for that. And one year Zach Greinke made his debut there. So every year there would be a reason I'd go to an Oakland baseball game. And when I go to an Oakland baseball game, it always felt to me very sunny. It felt very happy. I would walk around the stadium. The crowds were not big at all, but people. I would be walking through. People would offer to buy me a beer. It was just a very happy, friendly place. Every year during that stretch of time, my entire time in Kansas City, I would go to Oakland for a football game. Nobody bought me a beer. A few people did throw beers at me in Oakland. And people would come up to you and they would, have spikes on their shoulders and their faces were painted black and they were just like, I'd like to run you over with my car. And it was just a very different place. And it occurred to me as I'm starting to write this book, I'm trying to think, what's the difference? Baseball, football. I'm writing this book. I want this book to feel this way, but I want this football book to feel different. And I thought, these Oakland people, they're the same people. They're the same fans. There's the baseball fans here, the football fans here, and they're totally different. They dress up here, and they're dancing happily here, but they're the same people. And I thought, I want to capture the emotion of what it is that football does to us. What it is that football, because football, I don't need to tell you, football's the biggest thing in America, by far. It's not just the biggest sport in America. There's nothing even close to football in America. Last year, 2023, 93 of the top 100 rated television shows in America were football games. 93 of the top 100, and that's not even the amazing part. The amazing part is, of the other 7, 3 were college football games. And of the other 4, 1 was the State of the Union address, 1 was the Academy Awards, 1 was the Macy's Days Parade, and the 4th, the most obvious, an episode of Next Chef. And the reason the episode of Next Chef is on the list is because it followed the Super Bowl. That's the kind of incredible, the way that football hits America, and only America, by the way. The other amazing element of this is that, obviously, I think everybody knows, soccer, football, as it's called, is by far the #1 sport in the world. It's the #1 sport in 155 different countries around the world. Soccer is #1. Cricket is the second most countries. 13 different countries where cricket, like India and Pakistan, where cricket is the #1 sport. Baseball, the #1 sport in 9 different countries. Japan, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Venezuela. Basketball, #1. There's 3 countries in the world that have their own sport that nobody else has as their #1 sport. In Mongolia, the #1 sport is Mongolian wrestling, which seems obvious if you think about it. In Ireland, the #1 sport is Gaelic football. And the #2 sport in Ireland is hurling. So nobody has any idea what's going on in Ireland. It's like its own thing. And the third is America and American football. That's the kind of the way that this sport has gotten into us as a culture, as a society. And I wanted to capture that. And I wanted to figure out the best way to write about that. And I realized that the best way to write about that was to write about these moments, these 100 moments that are professional football moments, college football moments, high school football moments, fictional. There's a couple of fictional football moments in here. Because I wanted to get at every single aspect of it. I wanted to try to write about, because there's not one reason. Like if I would say to people, okay, tell me why you love baseball, virtually every one of them will tell me about their first game and walking into the park for the first time and seeing the field and the grass and the way it touched them and you know, playing catch with their dads and listening to the games in the backyard at the barbecue. I mean, it was always related to something that goes back to family and childhood. You ask people why they love football, and it could be 1,000 different things. I love football because I'm a big Chiefs fan. I love football because my fantasy team is in first place. I love football because I bet on it. I love football because I'm an Alabama fan. I love football because, you know, there's so many different reasons that people love the game, and I wanted to try to capture as many of those as I could. I wanted to try to get at the heart of it. And actually, that's why this book is the way it is, where it's 100 moments, which is more than I put in the baseball book. This was actually, I had sold a completely different book. When I finished writing Why We Love Baseball, my publishing house and the great people there at Dutton, they approached me because I had, for my newsletter, which is Joe Blogs, if anybody would like to sign up. It is a Substack. On my newsletter, I had counted down the 100 greatest football players ever. And I did that. It was a lot like the Baseball 100 project, but different because football's hard to compare. Like how are you comparing a quarterback and a free safety? And I mean, it's very different. But I still did it, and I loved doing it and enjoyed it. And I wrote it for my newsletter, and the publishing house said, we want to publish that as a book. We want to call it the Football 101. I counted 101 players so I could get Patrick in there. And of course now Patrick I wouldn't have to go to 101 for Patrick now, but back then I did. And they were going to publish that. And we signed the deal to do it. Like we were done. It was signed. And then, and so my wife's here, so she can tell you this is true. I have moments where she just does not understand what goes on in my head, because I had literally written that book. That book was done. It was completely done. I did no work. And I went back to the publishing house and I said, you know, this is probably the last football book I'm going to write. Because I've got other things I want to do. There are a bunch of other projects. And I'm only going to write this once. I'm only going to write one book of this sweeping nature about football. And I don't think it should be a football. I don't think it should be a countdown of the players. I think it should be a countdown of the moments. I think it should be this why we love football. I had just done it with baseball, and I thought this is even a stronger, premise for football. And I think because football is moments, right? Football is you're sitting there the entire game waiting for that one moment that's going to change the whole game. And I thought this is what I want it to be. I want it to be why we love football. And they said to me two things. The first thing they said to me is listen, we have complete faith in you. We trust you implicitly. If that's what you think this book should be, we support you 100%. And the second thing they said was, same deadline. Which didn't seem fair, really, to have the same deadline since I'd written the entire book. And this one I had not started. So Margot still hasn't forgiven me for any of this, but I did it. I wrote this book, and I'm so happy I did, because this is the book I wanted. to write. This is the book that, because this I'll give you one sort of theme of this book. And I actually looked this up, and I talked to, and you would never think for a Why We Love Football book I would talk to a biblical scholar. But I did. I talked to a biblical scholar who confirmed to me that, that most scholars tend to agree there have been 35, Jesus performed 35 miracles in the Gospels. That's the number that's generally accepted, 35 miracles in the Gospels. There are so many more miracles in football. Just so many more. And they're all called miracles. Like every one of them, miracle at the Meadowlands, miracle at Music City miracle, miracle at Michigan, miracle at Mississippi, miracle, there are countless miracles. And so I have the miracles scattered throughout this book. I actually have them on the sevens, kind of the way you get traffic on the nines. So at 97, 87, 77, 67, I have these miracles, these plays that are called miracle. And I thought so much about why is it that we call these plays miracles. I mean, there are miracles in baseball. There's miracle with Coogan's Bluff, and there's a couple of miracles in basketball, but nothing like football. And I really thought, why is that? Why are there so many miracles in football? And I think it's because in football, you can score at any time on any play. And there's nothing really like that in any other sport. Where, you could score you could obviously score throwing the ball, you could score running the ball, but you could also score an interception, you could score on a fumble recovery, you could score on a punt return, you could score on a kickoff return, you could score on a block kick. So it can happen any time. And your game is never over. I truly believe that probably I'd say the biggest miracle in football, it's in many ways, happened in New York. It happened in New York in the late 1970s, and it involved two teams that were not that great. The Giants were terrible, and the Eagles were getting better. They were not great, but they were getting better. And the Giants had the game won. The Giants were up with time running out, and all they had to do was fall on the ball for the last 3 plays and win the game. And back then, in the 70s, the rules were a little bit different. So you couldn't just, like now you can take the snap, take a knee, and play's dead, and the clock's running and everything. That's why you see them in that victory formation at the end of games. But back then, that wasn't the rule. The rule back then was you were not down until somebody touched you. So if you were a quarterback and you kind of took a knee, somebody could then hit you as hard as they could. And if you fumbled, you fumbled. Like there were no, a lot of the rules have really been loosened. Back then, like they always said like the ground can't cause a fumble. But in the old days, ground could absolutely cause a fumble. They didn't care. You were not down until the whistle blew. So the Giants decided that, on first down, they thought they would, hey, we'll take a knee. And the quarterback, the guy by the name of Joe Posnanski, takes the snap, and again, because the knee was not, that wasn't how they did it, he kind of rolled to the ground. And several Eagles jumped on top of him. And a fight broke out. And the Giants offensive coordinator didn't like that. He was like, oh, this is kind of a dangerous way to end this game, so we're not going to do that. So on second down, he called for a running play. So he sent in a running play. Joe Posnanski was to hand the ball off to Larry Zonka, who was a great running back at the end of his career. And basically everybody in the huddle was like, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Are you sure you heard him right? Are you sure? And they're like, no, we're running a running play. So they handed it off to Larry Zonka, and Larry Zonka gained like 8 yards. And now it's third down, and now the clock is almost out, and all they've got to do is run one more play, and the game's over. And they go back in the huddle, and the offensive court, of course, they didn't have like the helmet, so they sent in the play, like a player would come in with the play. And a player came in with a play and said, yeah, we're running this running play. And now everybody in the huddle said, like, no, do not run another running play. We can't believe we got away with that one, And Larry Zonka was like, I don't want the ball. Don't give me the ball. And Pisarcik was a young quarterback at the time, and he was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And, you know, he decided, yeah, we better run the play because I'm going to get benched if I change the play here. So we're going to run the play. So they ran a running play, but the running play was kind of this complicated play where he had to take the handoff, spin all the way around, and hand the ball off to Larry Zonka. I mean, sure, it was something they ran 1,000 times, but it still was a little more complicated than it needed to be. So he turned to hand the ball off, and he handed it off to Larry Zonka's hip, which did not get it. It knocked the ball free. Now, Joe Posnanski sees the ball on the ground, and he's like, okay, all I have to do is fall on the ball. But his body didn't really seem to want to go down on the ground for the ball. So he found himself frozen. And while he was frozen, like trying to think about how to get on the ball, Herm Edwards picked up the ball from the Eagles and ran the rest of the way for a touchdown, and the Eagles won the game. Everybody got fired on the Giants. Literally every single person who was involved anywhere near that play. Larry Zonka retired. Years later, they were asking Larry Zonka, can you relive that play? And he was like, no, I will not relive that play ever again. I don't want to hear about it. But I love that play because, you know, these days we have, people will talk about win probability. That's a big thing, especially in baseball. But it's there in football too. So if you're up by 3 runs in the 8th inning, your win probability is 96% or something. You know, if you're up by 2 touchdowns and have the ball in the 4th quarter, your win probability is 83%. The Giants' win probability was 100%. And then it was 0%. And it happened in 1 play and 1 second. And for me, that is so much of what we love about the game. I mean, it's not what Giants fans love about the game, but it is so much about what we as fans get out of this game, I think. So I want to open it up to some questions and to talk about anything you want, but I will tell you one more story because it happened. I might even read this from here because this actually, I was in Kansas City as a columnist there, and I got an email from somebody, and it was just before Halloween in 2002. An email arrived in my inbox from Ohio about a high school football game in a rural community called McDermott, 100 miles outside of Cincinnati. I wrote about that game, even though I was in Kansas City at the time, because it seemed like a story worth telling. And the story goes like this. In Northwest High School, in a small Ohio town called McDermott, there was a student named Jake Porter. Everybody loved Jake because he was always so positive, always so optimistic, always so full of life. Jake had a genetic disease called chromosomal fragile X syndrome, which made learning difficult. Each day he would practice writing his name. Sometimes when he would get frustrated trying to write his name, his teacher would say, Jake, you have to write your name. What if people want your autograph? Jake liked that. He was on the football team, and track team, and basketball team at Northwest. His teammates helped him a lot, helped him tie his shoes and put on his pads. He helped them too. Once at the end of a basketball tournament, he watched another team cut down the nets in celebration. And he wanted to know why Northwest wasn't allowed to cut down the nets after a victory. They explained to him that some games are more important than others. Jake wouldn't believe that. All games are important, he said. That was something to think about. At the end of the season, the Northwest football coach Dave Franz came up with an idea. He wanted Jake to actually play in the game. Well, Northwest's last game of the season was against Waverly, a team having its best season in years. And Dave was honest enough with himself to know the game wouldn't be close. So he came up with the idea that Jake would come into the game late, they would hand him the ball, and Jake would take a knee. It seemed a great way to reward him for coming to practice every day, for all the hard work, and for his perpetually sunny point of view. All the guys on the team wanted it to happen. Dave called up Waverly's new coach, Derek DeWitt, and told him the plan. Derek, a tough football player from Los Angeles, who had brought a new attitude to Waverly football, indicated that would be fine. The day of the game came. Nobody at all was surprised when Waverly took a 42-0 lead. With a few seconds left, Dave France called timeout. He was ready to put Jake into the game. Only then, DeWitt called him out to the middle of the field. Nobody knew what was happening. Jake's mother, Liz, was working the concession stand, and she wondered if someone had gotten hurt. The others watched as the two coaches talked, each one shaking his head as if they were having some sort of disagreement. And then Dave France returned to the sidelines, called Jake over, and said, "You're in the game." They named the play 84 ISO. Jake knew he was going to get the ball, and he was going to take a knee. Then came the snap. The ball was handed to Jake. He did not go all the way down to one knee, but instead sort of just curtsied. He was ready to give the ball back to the official or anyone else, but no one came to get the ball. Instead, Jake looked up and saw his teammates lined up. They were pointing to the end zone. Then he looked over at the Waverly players. They were also pointing to the end zone. "Run, Jake," they yelled, and he started to run, 50 yards in all, escorted by his teammates and by his opponents, though at this point, what difference was there? There weren't two teams out there, Liz Porter would tell me. Everybody was on the same team. When Jake scored the touchdown, he raised his arm in triumph. It was like the Rose Bowl, Derek DeWitt would say. The reason he had been shaking his head was that he had told Dave France that he wanted to let Jake score. His whole team wanted to let Jake score. Dave had protested, but Derek insisted. "Look, I'm no hero. Jake is the hero," he would say later when the attention grew around him and everybody wanted to interview him and get inside his head. He received so much mail, so many calls, even a few critical ones, saying he'd broken a principle of sport by letting Jake score. "I feel sorry for those people," he said. "There's so much hate in the world. But this, well, this was bigger than hate." In the stands, people broke down in happy tears. Kids pretended to be Jake Porter. He loved it. For weeks after, he too did interview after interview, and he never grew tired of it. He also signed more than a few autographs. Then he rejoined the basketball team, went back to his classes, and would spend a couple of hours every day helping out the custodian. It didn't change him, his mother said. He's still just Jake. When I wrote the story the first time, all those years ago, I ended it this way. To this day, Jake Porter is sure he scored the winning touchdown in that game against Waverly. And you know what? He did. And thank you. I wanted that story in there too. I wanted stories in there that you knew. I wanted stories in there like the Immaculate Reception and Kick Six and the play and the helmet catch and all of the other really famous moments. And I wanted moments in there that captured something else, something different about this game. I mean, we all know the problems of football. We all know about the violence. We all know about the various issues that are a part of the game. And yet it's still so much a part of us. And what is that? Where does that come from? Why do we love it so much? So that's what I wanted to write about. And hopefully, a few of these stories tell that story. So with that, I would love to open this up to questions and talk about anything that you would like to talk about.
Oh, 1 second. Hello? Okay, sorry, we have a microphone.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, Craig. Taking microphone privileges real quick.
Yes.
All right, I have a question from someone who cannot be here.
Okay.
Let's see, sorry.
So my question is, why are they not here?
Yeah.
Okay, oh, you want me to tell?
No,
because he wrote why he isn't here, and it's a long explanation. I was going to save you from it.
Oh, okay.
But you asked, so you're getting it. Sorry.
Okay.
My husband, who proudly, this is all from him. Okay. My husband, who proudly served in defense of his country for 20 years, can't be here tonight because he's continuing to serve in a different capacity. Sorry, by developing citizens of character for our great nation. He's a JROTC instructor.
Nice.
And it's a drill meet. Sorry. Anyway, he read your book, The Machine.
Okay.
Well, he was on deployment like 15 or so years ago.
Wow.
He absolutely loves it.
Oh, wow.
So he is actually very, very upset that he is not here tonight.
I am too.
He waxes poetically about your book. He is from near Cincinnati and is a huge Reds fan,
Okay.
like from from the 90s, you
Sure.
know. I wanted to gauge your thoughts on Pete Rose.
I knew this was
Yeah.
coming.
And whether he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Okay, so believe it or not the first time I've been asked this question. And here's what I always do. Here's what I always do. How many people in this room think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame? How many people think Pete Rose should not be in the Hall of Fame? 50-50. It's every single time you do it. It's half the room. And the way that it works is 50% is not enough to get you in. You have to be 75%. So at some point I stopped thinking so much about whether he should and started thinking about whether he ever would get in the Hall of Fame. That's really what I thought about. Because I've been writing about Pete for many, many years. I was actually telling a story last night, and this is 100% true, when 5 years after he was suspended from baseball, so in 1988, he was suspended for life. Well, not even life, in forever. He was suspended from the game. For, at that time, not agreeing. There have been a lot of stages. At that point, he was saying he never bet on baseball. Later, he admitted he bet on baseball, but he never bet on his team. Later, he admitted he bet on his team. It just, there have been a lot of stages there. At this point, he was still insisting he never bet on baseball. And 5 years afterward, I was working in Cincinnati, and they said, we want you to do a story about Pete Rose, and 5 years later, after 5 years in the wilderness kind of thing. And I tried to reach out to Pete's people, and they said, no, he's not talking. He's not, he's completely not talking. We've gotten offers from 60 Minutes, we've gotten offers from Sports Illustrated, we've gotten offers, and I was working at the afternoon paper in Cincinnati, and he's not talking. I'm like, okay. So the paper said, listen, even if he's not talking, go down. He was living in Florida then, he was running a restaurant, Pete Rose Bar and Restaurant, and he was doing a radio show from there, so he was talking. And they said, just go down there and just watch the radio show and just kind of gauge what his life is like and try to write a little something. So I got down to this restaurant, and I got there really, really early. I got there at I think the show started at 7, and I got there at 1 or something like that. And I sat down, and the waitress comes over to me, and she says, yeah, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I'm going to probably need to be here kind of all day because I'm writing this story about Pete Rose. And she said, well, he's sitting right there. Why don't you go talk to him? And I said, yeah, no, he doesn't want to talk. I've already been told that. I don't want to bother him, but I'm just writing sort of a story from the outside perspective. And she said, he's sitting right there. Why don't you go talk to him? So I walked over to Pete Rose, and I said, Pete, hi, I'm from the Cincinnati Post. And he kicked out a chair and he said, sit down. And he talked to me for the next 3 hours. A lot of talking. But my favorite moment about this talking about Pete Rose is at one point he was trying to explain to him that they did not have any evidence that he had ever bet on baseball. And he said, give me your notebook for a second. And he gives me the notebook and he starts drawing stuff on the notebook, and I don't know what he's doing. And he's drawing and drawing. And then finally he shows it to me and he says, this is what a betting slip looks like. They do not have anything like this on me. They do not have any betting slips with my name on them, so they don't have any evidence. And I heard him say that, but what I really was thinking was, I really want to get my notebook back. That's probably really valuable. And he, before giving me the notebook back, he tore the paper out, crumpled it up, and put it in his pocket, because he probably sold it later. So So there are parts of Pete Rose that I love, and parts of Pete Rose that obviously you can't love. And he was a great player. And not only was he a great player, but he played the game in such a way that you admired it. He played it in baseball in a very admirable way. He was the guy that you pointed to when you were showing your kids, this is how you play the game. The guy that runs to first base on a walk, the guy that always takes the extra base, who will play 162 games a year, who will play every position, do anything to win. He was that kind of player, and that player belongs in the Hall of Fame. the guy who bet on baseball, who brought, tore baseball apart, who sued the game, who lied continuously, and then of course later we find out some pretty unsavory things about him off the field. It's hard to put that guy in the Hall of Fame. So, do I think he should be in the Hall of Fame? What I think is he'll never be in the Hall of Fame, and I think that's sort of where I've come down to it.
I haven't read the new book, but I had a couple observations on the baseball.
Sure.
First, thanks for the chapter on Wichita State and how Gene ended the last words.
Yes.
That's cool. That was
Yes.
really neat, and I don't know if you talked to, apparently, obviously you talked to Gene, that was cool.
Yes.
But then I wanted to lead into the new book and ask you, is there an equivalent in the new book?
Another Wichita story?
No. But a Dwayne Kuiper equivalent, the Dwayne Kuiper story in this book. Is there something, I know, because you were playing as a kid in your living room and all that, it's a little different for football, but I just thought, is there an equivalent of that kind of reach out where his wife emailed you? And
no.
Or just the whole Dwayne Kuiper story.
Well, so for those that don't know, Dwayne Kuiper was a second baseman for Cleveland when I was growing up there, and he was my hero, and I loved Dwayne Kuiper. Dwayne Kuiper was not a great player. He was not a good player. He hit one home run in his whole career. But so you would think, well, okay, he didn't have power, but he had speed. No, he was actually caught stealing more times than he was successful. He's the third worst base stealer in baseball history. So one home run and third worst baseball stealer in baseball history. I love him. He was my absolute hero and idol. And when Dwayne Kuiper is your hero, it's a lonely place. Okay, so they're not. So Dwayne became aware that he had somebody that grew up idolizing him, and years ago, my wife was doing a parenting blog, and on the bottom of the parenting blog would have her email, and one day she gets an email from Dwayne Kuiper. Basically, Dwayne wanted to surprise me with something. He had a plan, and he needed her help to surprise me with this thing. I'd never met him. I had never met Dwayne Kuiper at that point. So he sent her this note, and Margot responded in the best possible way. She responded, "Is this the real Dwayne Kuiper?" Yeah. Which he said is the best question he's ever been asked in his entire life, because nobody would ever pretend to be Dwayne Kuiper. And he wrote back, and so he later, they worked it out. They schemed, and he sent me like a bunch of stuff, like his old game-used bat and a hat and a ball, and he said his kids didn't want it, so he wanted to give it to me, to somebody who would appreciate it, and I do, and I mean it's still like the single most prized possession of my life. So I don't have anything exactly like that in this book, but I do have something that is just as cool to me in a very different way. When I was columnist in Kansas City, and how many of you are Chiefs fans? Okay, pretty good number. So you'll remember Priest Holmes. Priest Holmes was a great running back in the early 2000s. The best running back. He was the best running back in the game. He set the NFL record for touchdowns one year, led the league in rushing another year, was on his way to maybe the greatest season ever before he got hurt, a third year. So I mean, he had a 3 or 4 year run there. I honestly believe he should be in the Hall of Fame just for his 3, 4, 5 year run there in the middle. Priest was also a very difficult guy to know. He was very private, and he didn't like the media. So he would do things like sometimes he would talk to us, sometimes he wouldn't. Sometimes he would start talking to us and then walk off in the middle, like just literally in the middle of a sentence. You'd be like, "Priest, what do you think of the game today?" And he'd be like, "Well," and then he'd walk away. And it was very odd and very difficult to kind of get to know him at all. And I was the columnist at the Star at the time, and it was my job to try to figure out a way to get to know Priest Holmes. So Priest was a big chess player. And he had started a chess club in Kansas City for underprivileged kids, like a kind of in the Boys and Girls Club setup, where every week he would come out and he would play chess against these kids, teach them how to play. It was a very sweet and cool project that he was doing. So one week I went out to write about him. I thought I could write about him through chess. And my father was a very, very good chess player. My father actually won the Cleveland Open one year. He was like a master level chess player at the time. And so I grew up with chess, but I wasn't any good at it, but I grew up with it. And so at some point he said, "Hey, are we going to play?" And I said, "Sure, let's play." And we played chess, and he beat me. But I had my story, and I felt great. And I went and wrote my story about Priest and chess, and you know, it was probably the most, I mean, I don't know if it was the most insightful story, but it was the story where I got, that nobody had ever gotten that kind of, you know, support from him for writing a story. Thursday of that week, my phone rings. It's Priest Holmes. And he says, "Hey, I want to play chess. We need to play chess again this week. Come on out to the stadium tomorrow and we'll play chess." So I, like, sure, that'd be great. So I go out to the stadium on Friday, and it's after, you know, they do just kind of walkthroughs. It wasn't a full practice, and he came out, and I played chess against Priest on that Friday, and he beat me, and then they played the game. And the next week, on the Wednesday, he calls me, goes, "We're playing chess." And so every Friday before the games for the rest of the year, we play chess. And it was such an incredible insight into who he was. He beat me every time. There's only one time he didn't beat me, and it was years later. And by the way, I would always be in a winning position. Like every time, I was in a winning position, and then he would come back and beat me because he just would. And once he was at an autograph signing, and somebody said, "Hey, you played chess with Joe, right?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Is he any good?" And he goes, "You know, Joe is a very good chess player, but he chokes." Which is, I almost put that on the book. I actually was going to have that as the blurb on the back. The only time he ever beat him is I went to do a big story on him. This is after he retired, and he was in San Antonio where he lives and grew up. And I went out there and we talked. It was great catching up with him. He goes, "We're playing chess, right?" And I'm like, "Sure." He goes, "All right, well, we're going to play. Let's play tonight." And I'm like, "Great. Where do you want to play?" And he said, "Let's play at the Hooters." And I'm like, "Well, sure. Where else would we play?" So we played chess at the Hooters in San Antonio, and I beat him, which to me makes me the world chess Hooters champion. Nobody's beaten me at a Hooters ever. I would feel great. But you know, that kind of opportunity to get to know, like I've been so lucky in my life as a sports writer that I've gotten to know so many people in so many different realms and all of that. But to get to really be inside, like somebody's, you know, I mean, you learn so much playing chess against somebody, but also during that time he's telling me stories, and we became, you know, I mean, we ended up at the end when he was done, we ended up becoming friends, and so I think that's really special, and it's very rare, and it's rarer now than it's ever been. It's much harder to get any sort of insight into people, certainly when they retire, it changes, but during the playing days, that's the rarest thing. So that was the Chiefs' 13-3 season, and the year that he set the touchdown record, and to be there sort of that close to him was really special.
Thanks. Two questions.
Yes.
One, Carlos Beltran.
Yes.
As a Royals fan, was I supposed to cry or laugh at that chapter? And two, Barry Sanders, when you were talking to Jeff Lutz in your interview the other day, kind of at the end of your discussion, you said he retired early, you know, thought it was a little dismissive maybe, but given what we know about what the future holds for NFL running backs, I mean, that was a really smart move, I think.
Yeah, and if that came off as dismissive, it certainly was not intended to. I thought he did exactly what he wanted to do, and he retired exactly at the right time. I just said that he retired early so he didn't play as long as some of the other guys did. That was the only point I was trying to make. The Barry Sanders chapter is one of my favorites in the book because you want to talk about an interesting guy and somebody who had a lot going on. And football was never the number one thing for him. I mean, he's just got a lot. He's a spiritual guy, and he's got a lot of different things. And you know, he was great at football, but football he never wanted football to define him. And I think that's very unique. I mean, you know, it's very, very hard to think of the greatest athletes, and like Michael Jordan knows basketball defines him. Like that's part of what makes him Michael Jordan, right? But Barry Sanders never felt that way. And when Barry Sanders lost interest in the game, which is sort of what happened at the end, he's like, I'm not going to play anymore. And I could not possibly respect that more. So that came off differently than that. That's my fault. The Carlos Beltran chapter, yeah, you just need to be sad. I mean, I mean, I still see Carlos every now and again. You know, now he's a Yankees kind of announcer, but he's done a bunch of different things, and I still see him. And it amazes me because Carlos Beltran is the first sort of Hall of Fame caliber player, and I think he will end up in the Hall of Fame. He's the first Hall of Fame caliber player that I literally watched from day one. And I remember a very scared kid showing up at spring training who didn't speak English very well, who was scared to death, who was just, you know, every day. I remember Tony Muser was the manager, and Tony Muser said to him, listen, I don't care if you hit 0-0-0, just play good defense, you're my center fielder. Because he just had to tell him that because he was so unconfident. And then he went through this whole weird stretch of time where he had the pet monkey, and he was like, he used to bring a remote control car to the locker room, to the clubhouse, and he would run over like the toes of other players. And he was a kid, and he was still trying to figure it out. And then, you know, for him to go through his whole career, forgetting what happened in Houston, to become a leader on basically every team that he was on, and to become so admired and respected. And I think it's a real shame that he did not get to be the Mets manager. I think he would have been a very good manager. He was one of those guys who could speak to everybody, you know, and everybody respected him. It was the Latino players respected him, the Japanese players respected him, the American players respected him. So he's a remarkable figure, and I think it's a shame that it ended the way it ended, because I think it's cost him, you know, votes for the Hall of Fame early on. But I do think he'll end up there.
So you just sent out your MVP mini book.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to reading that. And
Yes.
Judge was unanimous,
Yes.
and Witt is unanimous in the second for number
Second spot.
2. He got
Sure.
all the second spots.
Sure.
And I'm wondering if you think there's ever going to be a time where we don't already know who the MVPs, who the Cy Youngs are going to be. If there's ever going to be
Another time like that.
another time where it's up in the air. I mean,
Yeah.
Rick Porcello was a surprise, but
Right.
that was kind of a one-off, and you know, that kind of thing. And so we already kind of know
Yes.
who going in. And do you see that ever going back?
Well, thank you, by the way. Thank you for being a subscriber. I wrote a 16,000 word mini book about the history of the Most Valuable Player Award, from literally the very beginning. The person who created this whole idea. It was actually, the idea of the Most Valuable Player Award was considered absurd at first, because it was like, why would you give the most valuable player an award when the most valuable player already makes the most money? Like that's what valuable was. The most valuable player was the highest paid player. That was the idea. And this whole notion of giving an award to the player who helps his team the most or whatever. So I tell that story. There's so many turns, and it's a really turned out to be a very, very fun story to tell. But I talk at the end about how in 2012 there was a most valuable player battle between Miguel Cabrera, who won the Triple Crown, the most home runs, most RBIs, and the highest batting average, and Mike Trout, who did not have numbers that looked as good, but who, because of his base running value and his defensive value and various other things, had the highest wins above replacement, which was at that time a pretty new statistic that showed that he was more valuable. And at that point, people started changing the way they thought about the MVP. And there used to be the MVP, you could be any number of things. It could be, the player who's on the best team. It could be, the most valuable player because of his leadership, because of all these other things. And WAR, wins above replacement, kind of changed that. And I write about that, about how the last 10 years, you kind of have to be the WAR leader to win the MVP anymore. And I think it's kind of a bummer. I think it's, I'm a fan of the statistic, but I don't want the WAR leader to be the MVP every year, because then it's just, why just give them the WAR trophy? Like that, I want MVP to be thought of in multiple ways. I want different voters to have different opinions. I don't want everybody to be afraid to kind of be like, I think Bobby Witt was better than Aaron Judge this year, and I don't care who's going to yell at me for it. I don't care. And that doesn't exist now, because now even those that do believe that Bobby Witt was more valuable to the Royals than Aaron Judge was to the Yankees, they wouldn't say it. They wouldn't do it because their vote is being publicized. You mentioned that Aaron Judge won it unanimously. If he didn't win it unanimously, now everybody's attacking the one guy that honestly believed Bobby Witt was the better player. I mean, and there's an argument, there's an absolute argument to be made that Bobby Witt was, without Bobby Witt, without Aaron Judge, I don't know. I mean, the Yankees are still the highest, paid team in all of the American League. So I don't like that. And so that's part of the reason I wrote this book, mini book. That will be, by the way, a book someday. I'm giving my subscribers sort of an early peek at something that is going to be a book at some point someday. But that was why I wanted to do it, for exactly what you're saying. I don't know that there's going to be a time that we're not going to know. Because, there will be a time where two guys are locked, they're tied with WAR, so close. Like kind of the other year we had Mookie Betts and Mike Trout were, just a tiny bit difference, and there was a little bit of I don't know who's going to win it. But yeah, the way that it's run now, it does knock surprise out. And I wrote that mini book before the awards came out. But at the start, I talk about Aaron Judge winning it unanimously because we all knew it was going to happen. And I don't like that. I think part of it should be, I think the MVP is not doing its job if not every few years all of us don't think, what in the world are those guys smoking, right? Like if there's not something that just blows our mind, like that makes no sense, then I don't see the same value in it.
Okay, sorry, last question for the evening.
I have two.
Yes.
One is, do you think that NIL and the transfer portal is ruining college football and college basketball? And then the second one is, since college football and college basketball are making kind of most of the money, do you think at some point you'll see them kind of branch off in the NCAA and kind of be their own thing, since they're kind of already doing that?
Yeah. The second one I think is you've already nailed it. That's certainly the way it looks like it's going, and there's, I don't know what's tethering them to everything else. So that's it. The NIL and the fact that we were talking earlier, just at lunch with family, we were talking about how we were trying to remember who Kansas State's losses were to this year, and it's like I don't know who they were to, but we know that they were not in the conference 2 years ago. That it makes no sense that K-State plays them, right? It's like, well, maybe it was Utah or BYU. Like literally no history, no rivalry, no anything like that, you know. And I think that's a bummer. The NIL stuff is a bummer too, but not necessarily. I mean, I'm happy the players are getting paid. I feel like that's long overdue. I didn't need that money to be going to television executives and coaches and whatever. I'm glad the players are getting paid. But it's now the players are jumping from team to team because of the NIL. That's a bummer. It doesn't feel the same to me until it's on the field. And I was thinking about this a lot during the Georgia-Alabama game. Because obviously this year, the new rule, the new playoffs, so now that game didn't mean as much as like in the years before. That could have been a knockout game, right? And now it's not a knockout game. And I thought, it's not a knockout game. Plus, you know, both teams spent millions in the portal and this. But once they got on the field, it felt exactly like college football. You know, I think once the game starts and you're watching it and you're in the stands and everything is there, it feels the same. And so it's too good a game, I think, to not feel great and not be great. But it's different, and there are many things about college football now, especially for me, the conference realignments and having, like, I don't know who's in the SEC anymore. I have no idea. You know, and I'm just like, oh, that grand rivalry between Maryland and Rutgers is going to be maintained. You know, that doesn't do anything for me. So that part feels like a bummer, and a lot of the stuff surrounding the game feels like a bummer. But then on the field, the huge crowds, the bands and the cheerleaders and the players playing their hearts out, it still feels amazing. You know?
All right, I'm sorry we can't take any more questions, because seriously, I could listen for quite a while more.